So my chapter is for the collection is titled Courtly Love and Death Drive. And what I thought I would do is I'm going to read a little bit from it, but I also wanted to give you a little bit of background about how I arrived at this. So there's a very influential work in American literary and cultural studies from it's from 1960, titled "Love and Death in the American Novel" by Leslie Fiedler, and he wrote it throughout the 50s, and the preface is signed um, 1959, at the same time that Lacan was giving Seminar 7, was delivering the lectures that would comprise Seminar 7, in particular, the lessons on courtly love. And so I was rereading through Fiedler's book for the first time, and I teach chapters of it sometimes, but I was doing a long reread for the first time in a long time, and I came across something that I did not notice before, and it's that his discussion of courtly love and the role that it plays in literature. And again, he's writing this at the exact same time that Lacan is delivering his seminars, uh, in particular the lessons on courtly love in Seminar 7, and just how much of it overlaps with what Lacan says about it. And he talks about, the mistress of courtly love, being uh, physically undefined, faceless and historyless goddess, cruel, remote, and desirable. Um, right, the relationship, he says up here, the relationship of the lover to lady is expressed in feudal terms because this was for the time the natural language of subordination. The lover is his beloved's man. He owes her service. She's even sometimes addressed as Mesdames, not my lady, but literally my lord. Um, he goes through, the various different symptoms that are manifested by the courtly lover as a result of being struck, literally in some cases, by Cupid's arrow. Um, and this is the first step toward the full romantic celebration of madness, et cetera, et cetera. There are just all these passages that very much put me in mind of Lacan's treatment of courtly love. And he says here, no wonder some students of the literature of courtly love are tempted to read these symptoms as encoded ritual, to protest that so much torment so solemnly endured cannot be caused by the mere issue of sleeping with a woman, while others have insisted that the lover is not in love with the lady at all, but with suffering itself, ultimately with death. And then he even goes on to say here, you know, the love mythology of Europe. He says that it gives you the sense that the only death is the true or absolute bride. Love as joy and love as death. From its very beginnings, courtly love looks in both directions. And so, what was interesting to me is that this is a very Freudian book. It's before basically anybody in the English speaking world knew of or knew who Jacques Lacan was, or certainly before any of his work was published. And it just struck me that, and actually, Fiedler's book it's not only Freudian, but he draws on Jung at times. But what he's describing here, and I think what the American novels that he discusses actually do or stage, is it's kind of anticipating Lacan's point that, and this has been mentioned earlier by some of the other participants, that you do not have two separate drives, eros, thanatos, the love drives, death drives, but you have everything is a death drive, right? It's all death drive for Lacan. And so uh, when Julie contacted me about doing something for this collection on death and love, I said, "Oh, well, this is perfect for it," because it's almost as though what Fiedler is discussing, even though he doesn't put it this way himself, is a love and death drive. So, having said that, all of my examples in the actual essay or the chapter here are European. They're medieval. So this chapter is kind of like the first stage of a longer project about the how literature stages this sort of the imminence or inextricability of love and the death drive. So I'll read a little bit and then I'll just kind of skip around. I want to be mindful of the time, but I'll read a little bit just from the beginning here. Um, because it really lays the sort of foundation for the argument. Perhaps no other psychoanalytic concept has been subject to as much misprision as the death drive, typically understood as a will towards self-destruction, thanatos, that stands in utter contradistinction to the life drive, eros. The death drive, as Jacques Lacan clarifies in Seminar 11, the four fundamental concepts of psychoanalysis, is not the opposite of life, but on the contrary, pure life instinct. That is to say, immortal life or irrepressible life, indestructible life. And this is in particular when he's speaking about the lamella, the organ without a body. As such, the death drive is not so much an agent of death as of undeadness, an ensign not of human finitude and mortality, but of inhuman infinitude and immortality. As Slavoj Žižek puts it, the death drive is the reason why human life is never just life, why human beings are not simply alive, but possessed by the strange drive to enjoy life in excess, passionately attached to a surplus which sticks out and derails the ordinary run of things. Crucial distress here is that though this traumatic imbalance does indeed swerve the human being from its so-called natural state, rendering the human condition that of an animal sick unto death, it would be a mistake to think of the death drive as bringing about the death of that immortal being, which psychoanalysis designates as the subject, right? There is the unconscious recognizes no death, right? In the unconscious, subjectivity is the subject is immortal. For it is only through the death drive that authentic subjectivity emerges, an unconscious subjectivity embodied by the undead extimate object of surplus enjoyment, jouissance, that is at one and the same time the object cause of desire and the object loss of drive. This is, of course, the Lacanian objet petit a. To thus speak as many theoretical schools of thought do, like the standard sort of figure of the subject in much analytic and even continental philosophy. To speak of the human subject is for psychoanalysis a misnomer, for the term subject designates the emergence of an uncanny, inhuman being within the very heart of human being, a death-driven being that expropriates. It's another like X word, like extimacy or eccentricity in Lacan. A death-driven being that expropriates the human being from itself, thereby rendering it forever disoriented, forever non-identical with itself. And so you can already see a number of the resonances with some of the other papers, some of the other talks. So what I think is most interesting, or in going back to think about this with regard to, and this ties in with what Todd was saying about freedom and finity versus infinitude. I thought that actually, I went back to Joan Kopchak's great book, Read My Desire. In particular, I was working on something on her chapter, The Sartorial Superego. And that's a chapter where she reminds us that the death drive in disorienting, expropriating the human being, compelling it to act contrary to its own good, against its own best interests, that's an ethical agency. Kopchak reminds us that the very ethics of psychoanalysis rests upon the principle of the death drive, in that the freedom of the ethical subject is, and this is Kopchak, the freedom to resist the lure of the pleasure principle, to disregard all circumstances, causes, conditions, all promises of reward or punishment for its actions, and submit oneself to the law of the death drive. So Kant would say the subject's ethical freedom is non-pathological. That's why, as Zizek often likes to put it, simply freedom hurts, because authentic freedom entails submission to an extimate agency that, though it constitutes the innermost core of one's being, that which is in one more than oneself, one cannot help but experience as a foreign intruder, something fundamentally alien. This is why Alenka Zupancic characterizes the ethics of psychoanalysis as an ethics of the real, right? An ethics wherein one, as in the quintessential case of Antigone, is confronted with the unbearable, this is another sort of Žižekian turn of phrase, the unbearable burden of a really free choice. A choice that, like the real itself, is impossible. And yet, as we know, Lacan insists that the impossible happens. So, what I decided to focus on in this chapter was the very similar and there's a lot of resonance here with what Gautam was talking about, is just like what does literature tell us about the connection between death and love, or between love and death drive? And I was going back to this really great chapter from the second volume of the Seek series, edited by Zizek, titled "At First Sight," and it's all about the trope of love at first sight in many literary works. And as Delar points out, though we tend to think that true love can't exist without an autonomy of free choice with respect to one's love object, a cursory glance through the centuries of effusions about love will quickly disabuse us of this notion, for these works repeatedly suggest that love and the autonomy of the subject rule each other out, right? This is why Delar links it to the veil of alienation, or the forced choice, right? That Lacan discusses in Seminar 7 or Seminar 11, right? The most iconic example of which being your money or your life, right? And Delar says, as a rule, love in these texts appears in the guise of the forced choice, a choice whose properties depend on the fact that in the joining of there's one element, whatever the choice operating might be, that has as its consequence neither one nor the other, right? The one element being the lethal factor, as Lacan puts it. So, right, your money or your life is not really a choice, right? To choose money is to lose both one's money and one's life. And so that's the kind of dilemma that the lover finds typically himself in these works, right? So if the annals of literary love teach us nothing else, it's that to exercise one's freedom with respect to love can't but be experienced as its very opposite, submission to that ultimate other, fate. And so Delar gives a nice little overview of this at one point, kind of encapsulating the narrative of this. So let me just read this for a second. A young hero, quite by coincidence and through no endeavor of his, meets a young girl in some more or less extraordinary circumstances. And what happened unintentionally and by pure chance is in the second stage recognized as the realization of his innermost and immemorial wishes and desires. The contingent miraculously becomes the place of his deepest truth, the sign of fate given by the other. It's the other that is chosen, not the young man himself, who was powerless. But it turns out that the pure chance was actually no chance at all. The intrusion of the unforeseen turned into necessity, so Tish turns into automaton. The moment of subjectivation is precisely that moment of suspension of subjectivity to the other. Fate, providence, destiny, right? There's many names for it, manifesting itself as the pure contingency of the real. Indeed, the strange force of love reputedly rules out any other considerations. It does not permit deliberation, the balance of gains and losses, pondering the advantages of a certain choice. It just demands the unconditional surrender to the other, right? So that's basically the framework. And so here we see how the forced choice of love, as you might put it, throws the lover headlong into an ethics of the real. Like the non-pathological ethics of psychoanalysis, which rejects all utilitarian calculations and concerns, the strange force of love at first sight, a force that appears to the lover as though it were the sign of fate given by the other, brooks no pondering or deliberation, no balance of gains or losses. On the contrary, as with the Kantian categorical imperative, an empty, purely formal command to do one's duty for duty's sake only, love at first sight is utterly non-pathological, motivated not by its determinate object, but by the mere form of love. Like love for love's sake, right? Like duty for duty's sake in a way, not for the sake of what distinguishes the object. And that's why, um, you know, Gautam was talking earlier about um, the cliche, right? The most important person, for the lover, and yet the words that they say are utterly cliche. And Lacan makes a very similar point his in his discussion of courtly love, is right, like it's all the same woman. If you like, when you read courtly love, it's the same person described over and over again. And so let me just skip a little bit, and I'll give you some of the literary examples that I talk about briefly in the essay. So the first one is from one of Geoffrey Chaucer's complaints, and I have the like modern English prosification, but I would probably be killed by my medievalist colleagues if I didn't at least give the the Middle English version of the text. But this is typical. In the long night, when every creature should naturally take some rest, else his life cannot long hold out, then it falls most into my woeful thoughts how I have dropped so far behind that. Say, sorry, yeah, my dogs are barking. I gotta. Sorry about that. Okay. Else his life cannot long hold out. Then it falls most into my woeful thoughts how I have dropped so far behind that, save death not. Sorry, now I'm reading fast. Um, so far behind that save death naught can comfort me, so despair I of all happiness. This thought abides with me till morn, and forth from morn till eve. I need borrow no grief. I have both leisure and leave to mourn. There is no wight will take my woe, or forbid me to weep enough and wail my fill. The sore spark of pain destroys me. This love has so placed me that he will never fulfill my desire, for neither pity, mercy, nor grace can I find. Yet even for fear of death can I not root out love from my sorrowful heart. The more I love, the more my lady pains me, through which I see without remedy that I may nowise escape death. Right? So that's one of like five or six other complaints that that Chaucer has, almost all of which have to do with this um, sort of like inhuman partner of the lady, capital L. So one other example that I discuss in the piece is from Dante's Vita Nuova, and this is a famous painting of Dante and Beatrice, but this is the moment, this is Dante describing the moment when he first meets or first sets eyes on Beatrice. At that very moment, and I speak the truth, the vital spirit, um, oops, sorry, I gotta go back. Oh, I'm giving away all my clues here. Uh, the vital spirit, the one that dwells in the most secret chamber of the heart, began to tremble so violently that even the most minute veins of my body were strangely affected. And trembling, it spoke these words, the English translation: Here is a God stronger than I who comes to rule over me. At that point, the animal spirit, the one abiding in the high chamber to which all the senses bring their perceptions, was stricken with amazement, and, speaking directly to the spirits of sight, said these words: Now your bliss has appeared. At that point, the natural spirit, the one dwelling in that part where our food is digested, began to weep, and weeping said these words: Oh, wretched me, for I shall be disturbed often from now on. Let me say that from that time on, love governed my soul, which became immediately devoted to him, and he reigned over me with such assurance and lordship, given him by the power of my imagination, that I could only dedicate myself to fulfilling his every pleasure. um, what's interesting is the mediation here of the god of love, capital L, even though it's the object of it is Beatrice. And then later on, this is one of the poems that he's writing, and he says, yeah, that heart of his, my lady. He's asking the mediator here to relay this message to her. That heart of his, my lady, has been so firmly faithful that every thought keeps him a slave to you. It was early yours and never changed allegiance. If she should not believe you, tell her to question love who knows the truth, and end by offering this humble prayer. If granting me forgiveness would offend her, then may her answer sentence me to death, and she will see a slave's obedience. So here, what we have is um, the sort of intrusion of what I'm calling, or what I would call, the love and death drive, uh, as one. As a courtly lover, Dante is all too willing to sacrifice his bare mortal life for the excessive new life that might be the vita nuova, opening within him by the immortality of the love and death drive. And this is why he associates love with jouissance, something that is simultaneously the source of his greatest happiness, right? Now your bliss has appeared, um, and his abject wretchedness. Oh, wretched me, for I shall be disturbed often from now on. So, like Chaucer does in his complaint, Dante stages this coalescence of the love and death drive in the form, really, of, we might say, a will to jouissance that, to put things in Lacanian language, transposes the human being from this simple S, a pathological subject, a brute subject of pleasure, to S, the barred S, the non-pathological barred subject of a sublime enjoyment located altogether beyond the pleasure principle. So the literature of courtly love and its more modern manifestations, which obviously I don't discuss here, repeatedly demonstrates that, like, tarrying with the abyssal freedom of the choice is a painful, anxiety-ridden experience, and yet this pain, this anxiety, we might call it a love sickness unto death, is the very substance of the subject's freedom. And so this is why the ethics of love and the ethics of the death drive are one and the same. Why Eros and Thanatos are not opposites, as Lacan insisted, but they're one and the same drive. And so I conclude the essay by saying, um, we could say that a nice formulation would be that when it comes to the relationship between love and death drive, love is on the side of the death drive. Okay, I'll stop there.